I've never met Valentina Shevchenko. I'm certainly an admirer, certainly an observer of the greatness, but I've never met her. And in my fantasy, when we meet each other, it starts with a handshake and that conversation ends with a hug. And in my fantasy, she thanks me. I hear all the things that you said. You're the only person that had the courage to be critical. While you were being critical, you offered me advice, and it turned out you were right every time. Like, that's how I see it in my fantasy. Her kicking me right in the nuts is probably a more realistic scenario, but I do see it that way. And I haven't been wrong. Not once. And if you guys saw, there was an announcement last night. And Shevchenko, who's done everything in the world that you can do, and she's done it better than anyone else who's ever done it, has never headlined a show. And I've made that observation from day one, but I've also said what could be done to change that. And there is always the misconception that greatness sells, right? The greatest player gets the most money. The greatest player gets drafted first. The greatest player gets the sponsorships. The greatest player, right? So you start to make some of these very natural and reasonable assertions. But very few who are truly great, who are above, who have separated themselves, have been interesting. I'll give you a tremendous example, which is Michael Jordan was clearly the greatest basketball player to have done it. And people came out. They came live. They waited in lines. They bought T-shirts. They sat home. They turned on the channel to witness his greatness. If they had a reasonable belief a game was going to be 106-50, absolutely nothing to see. Absolutely nothing that you're on the edge of your seat. And there's nothing here that you didn't know prior to sitting down. They could still do great ratings with Jordan. He had a greatness that people were willing to pay to see, as opposed to a competitiveness. And that was very rare and unique, and it's an observation that very few have made, even though it was right in front of you. And you could go right from Jordan as the world's greatest athlete. Jordan handed the torch. Do you guys know who he handed it to? I'd love to pause here and have you throw some names out, because I don't know if any of you would have had the right one. I don't say that constant. Do you know who Jordan passed the world, that I'm the greatest, I'm heads and shoulders, I'm above everybody, and he passed that baton? Do you know who he passed it to? Passed it to Roy Jones Jr. But they had very different outcomes. The world was willing to pay, and it was monetizable, the greatness of Jordan, the slam dunks, the effort, the tongue hanging out. He was a handsome guy. He had the whole bit. The championships, the bowls, Scottie Pippen and Rodman with him. They were willing to pay. They were willing to part with not only their money, but with their time to witness this. So a lot of the same people that helped to make and create and profited off of partnering with Jordan did it with Roy Jones Jr. That's why it's not arguable. It's unequivocal. The torch was passed to Roy Jones. I live in Oregon. Nike, the Nike, it's exactly 22 minutes that way. And if you ever go on campus, beautiful compound, they do tours. It's a very interesting thing to see. But they have the Michael Jordan facility, the Michael Jordan area. You know who else has there? Roy Jones Jr. And they thought, for a good reason, we just take what we did with Jordan, we just pass that to Roy Jones, let's get going. We'll do the T-shirts and we'll do the towels, we'll make some mouthpieces, we'll switch it up a little bit, we're going to do everything we did with him, we're going to do it with Roy. And they did. They infused a ton of money. They did not get the same return. Roy fell into a different category. Roy Jones is without question the best boxer of a decade, the 90s. I was in college, he was the best. Iron Mike Tyson was still fighting then. Lennox Lewis was still fighting then, just for perspective. Klitschko's had already broken on the scene. Roy Jones was the fighter of the 90s. And Tyson, Klitschko, and Lennox Lewis would tell you that too. But he never had the big fight. He never had the big must-see fight. They did all the right promotion. They did all the same promotion. They did all of the countdown shows. Did all of the press conference, all of the media. And Roy was out and about. Roy was willing to do. Roy had a little bit of a gimmick. He even started rapping at one point. He sang himself to the ring at one point. Like, Roy was willing to entertain. He's in the ring with the hands down. I mean, he was entertaining, though. This was for the crowd. Roy did everything right. But the world has a very hard time giving up their time or their money to witness a sporting event where they are very confident in the outcome. Where there's no water cooler to, hey, you looking forward to the fight? Oh, man, he's taking a southpaw, man. He never fought with a southpaw before. This guy is so fast. You know, they met up in the amateurs at the Olympic trials. There was never anything like that with Roy. Never. Zero. And it's really important that you do understand that concept, because Valentina Shevchenko, who has done more in this sport than most, has had more success than I ever dreamed of, was just announced last night she's going to be a main event. What's different? What changed? She got beat. Why does that matter, and how does that help? Because for the first time in her career, the audience, from a competitive standpoint, does not have a strong reason to believe the outcome. That's the difference. And it's always one of these things that's missed. It's been missed on every fighter with an ego who's ever been handed a microphone and tells the world how great he is, and he's number one, and he's the best of 3 generations, and nobody can beat him, and nobody's ever beat him. La, 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 la. But who made the most money? Because they sold the most was George St. Pierre, who, when given a microphone and referring to his opponent, told the world he was scared every time. This is the best jiu-jitsu practitioner I've ever taken on. I've enlisted the finest coaches. I'm very hesitant to be on the ground with him. Every single time George talked up the opponent. George never lost a fight. George he didn't lose rounds. Tell me a guy that you know that won a round against George. Go ahead. Go ahead. You hardcore 20th anniversary guys who tell me John Hendricks. Tell me another guy. George St. Pierre was fighting at a high level since 2002. I'm asking you to tell me a round that he lost, but he tell everybody this was his hardest fight. It's the most dangerous, and he'd even give reasons. This position, this technique. I've been susceptible to this my whole life, and it's what he does so well. Oh, God, I'm having nightmares about this guy. Boom, 1 million pay-per-views. And it's just a concept. I don't know that it's one that you can copy. Like, just by example, I don't know that if I'm Valentina's manager and I'm trying to make her money, right? Like by no means do I tell, hey, we got to lose a fight in here. I'm not doing that. Not in the least. I'm just sharing with you. There's ways to handle defeat, and there's ways to fall forward. You don't have to fall down. You don't have to fall back. You can stumble uphill. But you're not going to be able to do anything. You're not going to be able to manipulate a single thing if you don't just observe some of these concepts. And it's very helpful. And I do think you should sit back, and I do think you should ask yourself, my goodness, Chael's right. Wow, wait a second. She was champion of the world a dozen times, and she never got a main event. She's no longer champion of the world, and she gets a main event. She lost her last fight, and she gets to move up the card? What? Yeah. Why? Well, it's more interesting. The first one that's interesting. Her greatness was not observed like Jordan's. Very few are. Her greatness was observed like Roy Jones. That's the common. That's the normal one.